Alright, YouTube, we are back to go ahead and reassemble this iPhone 5. Now this will be a very, very long video. I believe it's over an hour long, as I want to show you step by step how to reassemble this iPhone 5. Disassembly is always pretty easy, but I think the reassembly is a little bit more difficult. So we're going to go through this and help you put all the new pieces we just took out of the old housing into this new rear housing. First thing we're going to start with is the clips for the side of the phone, where the screen's going to clip in. You want to put these in so the V part will be down so it'll actually stand out. So it shouldn't be flush with the housing, it should be set off the housing. That way when you put your screen on, it has an insert to set into. This is what clips the screen together and holds it in place on top of the housing. There are two screws that go in each of these, so make sure you kept your screws separate as you took your iPhone apart. Go ahead and put them back in exactly where you removed them. So starting with these side screws first. I make sure that these are nice and snug. I wouldn't say that you have to strip the screw heads out trying to get them in there, but you definitely want them to be tight, as you don't want them to loosen. You don't want your screen to start falling out of your phone as you're using it. And this is how it clips in, so make sure these are nice and snug. We have two on each side, so that's 4 screws to each side.
It's you. Your moves. Your skills. Become a champion.
They can be a little bit tricky. I find that it's easy to use a magnetized screwdriver. Make sure you have the screw on the head of the screwdriver first, and then go ahead and insert them in. So just making sure that I put this on correctly and that the top of it outsets from the housing.
And increased energy.
So our third screw, you can see right here, you can see that there's a little tiny gap between my housing. They kind of go in a V shape with some bent metal at the bottom. You want that to go down towards the bottom of your housing. Just going to put both these in and snug them up just a little bit. Make sure they're nice and tight. With that done, we can go ahead and move on to the other side of the phone and go ahead and put both on here.
Just give me time to reflect on some of life's biggest questions. Like, if you could save hundreds on car insurance by making one simple...
And again, there are 2 on this side, so that'll be a total of 4 screws here as well.
You can't get any bars. Don't look like that.
Brought to you by Geico. 15 minutes can save you 15% or more on car insurance.
15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
Perfect. Just make sure they're both nice and snug. Then we can move on to our last LCD front panel connector here.
Done. You're fired. Well, gotta run. Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. On the next post office. No, don't park there. Is he sending a customer away? Idiot. All right, John, you're fired. Every weekend, all new episode of Post.
Alright, both screws are in. Now we have the connection that's going to let our LCD set in there. We're going to go ahead and put our switch in for the SIM card tray. And there's a fin on one side and a short stub on the other side. The fin, tall part, you want to go towards the bottom of the phone, the place where you're going to insert the SIM card unlock tool. So when you push in, it should have this little tray pushing out. We're going to go ahead and start with the bottom of the phone and putting our charging port piece back in. The slim side, I believe, goes down on this. It'll fit. It won't fit in if you don't do it correctly. You can use a spudger to help kind of squish it back into place here. Should have some glue residue on there, which should hold it back into place. Putting back into place the little cover for the loudspeaker. Just gonna move it around here. We have some little mesh grills that go onto the other side of the phone, kind of like a dust cover for the phone, for that port down there, the grill. Now it's not very sticky at this point, and I do not believe that it's actually going to re-adhere itself to the bottom of the phone. I'm just going to try it here real quick and make sure. Just going to push down on it. We definitely don't want this flipping around the inside of our phone. It doesn't seem like it wants to stay in place too well.
Why have you done this? Did you really think that I could ever forgive this man for threatening to kill my family? So what will you do now?
We're going to put our charging port piece back in. See if that'll hold down that little grill for us.
Since you consort with eagles.
Fortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to do. So in this case, we're just going to use a little tiny bit of super glue. I like this little brush piece that I have for it. And we're just going to put it right on the sides. Now, I'm not saying a lot. We're just going to use a tiny, tiny bit. We want to be able to remove this if we need to take this phone out. Make sure that if it's leaking into any of the ports below, any of the little round holes, that you just blow through it and make sure that the glue comes out. We're just going to go ahead and put the grill on here. We have two grill pieces here.
Are you going to proceed with the execution of the artwork? I am.
Make sure it fits nice and snug.
Ambitions.
Looks good.
What would you have me do? I will arrange for my escape.
I'm going to do the same thing on top of this one, just a tiny, tiny bit of glue. Let's use some brush-on super glue. And we'll put our second layer of mesh grill on.
This guy loves the same stuff that we do. They got a Nash. Oh, cool. Is that original paint? It is.
Make sure you stick it on there nice and tight.
Mike is totally freaking out here. He's close to having a religious experience.
Make sure no glue leaks out.
Spinning sideways. Love it.
Alright, we're going to put the speaker port just on, make sure and see how it functions. Looks good.
If I get too close, where I like to be because I can actually touch the pedals, it'd be nice if you could just
Pressing on the sides, make sure that it's adhered nice and well, and nothing is overlapping outside of the housing.
This is not made for normal people. What do you mean? I'm 5'11". That's what I meant. It's not made for normal people. The normal is 5'6".
We have this little tiny connector up here. This is what holds down part of the antenna. I'm just going to try to stick it on here real quick and see if it stays, if it has any adhesive properties next to it. I took it out and it was definitely stuck onto the last phone pretty well. It does have a connector pin. It looks like it must connect to like the underside of the logic board or something that actually hits against it. We have this little tiny phone connector we're going to put back onto the underside of the board. You can see there's a cutout right next to where I just put down that silver that antenna holder, the wire holder. This little black piece fits right into the curve. So curve side goes in, and the square side stays out.
Colorado has a rich pioneer history. In this region of the country, that's the kind of stuff we're digging for.
Now I can put all this stuff back in here because I am pretty sure it's in here for a reason. They don't just randomly put foam padding into phones and waste that time. So it must be protecting against something. So we're just going to make sure we put it back in. That way we don't get any interference or any misuse of parts of the phone itself. So this little silver pad which goes right above the ones we just put in. This one lost its sticky parts. It doesn't look like it's going to stay on there very well. We may have to just use a little bit of glue onto this one as well to get it to stick. Now again, we're not using a ton of glue. We still want this to be foam and not turn into a rock. Just enough to give it that tacky feel to make it stick back on.
So Danny said that he was.
Try to use my metal tool here to get it to stick. Apparently, I have to use my fingers.
Really big mutton chops inside of his face. He's always been in this area. I was born right here in Fruita, Colorado.
Is your mother still alive?
My mother's still alive.
Okay, so she's still living.
Doesn't want to stick back on here very well. There we go.
But she did follow him around with her checkbook, so I guess it worked out for both of them.
It's 1913. Oh wow.
This was a
Just push it down with my dental tool, make sure that it's stuck on there nice and well.
Into that building. I think I'm back in Iowa. It was like being in Iowa. This is really cool. Yeah. Farm implement stuff. He's got headlights. Right. This is just the first place we've been in. These guys got 5 or 6 or 10 barns here, and you've got to sift through it all. This is incredible.
Alright, making decent progress here. We do have a lot of parts to put back into this phone. Like I was saying, it's much harder to put, I think, parts back into the phone than it is to take out of the phone. I'm not really sure why people don't ever show reassembly videos. There's some little tiny washers that'll come out. They're very, very thin. They go over these 4 prongs down here at the bottom that kind of hook into your charging port. The little washers. I'm going to go ahead and put those back on and make sure we put them back into the right spot on the phone. Now, I've seen these being removed, and in fact I did it in my charging port video. I didn't actually put these back into the phone. They're very thin, and I couldn't see that there'd be a huge issue with not putting them in, and nothing weird happened. But again, I like to try to put everything back in. Any washers, even if they're very thin, or any foam pieces, that way that we don't have any misworking parts or shorting out or anything of that nature. We had one still in there, so we're going to go ahead and put our charging port cable back in. So we start by lifting it up and then sliding it in and then pushing the actual connection down, making sure that all 4 screw ports of the charging port are lined up. Our 3.5mm headphone jack is lined up back to its port, and that the little speaker, the mic port there, fits back into where it should be as well. Just going to pick it up and look at it and make sure that everything looks good, which it does.
So I'm at 65, you're at 75, so where are we at now?
We're 70.
We're at 70. I'll take it. All right. This property keeps going and going and going. Let's get the cash rolling. Look at this. Look how fancy this is, Frankie.
I believe it was for shaved ice.
Oh, that's cool. Wow.
Now at this point I really wish I would have put my loudspeaker assembly in. There's a couple of screws that I'm going to put in here that I'm going to have to remove. As I started putting them in before I put the loudspeaker assembly in, and that actually holds that assembly down. Now putting one in on the far side here might make it a little bit easier.
This one is a 61, I believe.
And there is a screw part that goes to the loudspeaker assembly that must go in the bottom right hand corner. Just checking to make sure that my headphone jack there is aligned. There's a screw that goes in for the headphone jack as well, and that's where that screw goes for this little ribbon cable. Kind of connects in.
Never has to stop. And this summer, you can save up to 30% off a select Walt Disney World
There's a screw that goes right above where the home button touches.
and discover how close the magic can be.
Now, like I was saying, I will have to remove a couple of these to put the loudspeaker in. So if you're reassembling your phone as we go through the video, you might want to wait until I get to that point, just to make it a little bit easier.
Everything you need at the spring sale at Men's Warehouse.
I know you've had surf and turf before, but honey, you have never had puffed
Here is our loudspeaker portion.
4 butterfly shrimp, 2 handcrafted chicken tenders, Cajun fries, a biscuit, and 2 different sauces for just $4.99.
This little black wire antenna cable goes underneath it. So we're going to slide this down towards the bottom of the phone at an angle, and then once we get it to the right where we want it, we'll push it back down so it sits nice and flat.
Both of these
See,
two should
there's
go
2
on
screws
there.
that I put in. This one here, and this one on the side here, both need to come out. As well as one that goes right next to the charging ports. Right in here. That screw will need to be removed as well. Alright, now the ribbon cable that kind of comes down and around the bottom here is a little bit tricky to get back into place. Technically what you have to do is kind of lift up the audio jack, fold the cable around the audio jack, and then put it into place. You can see me mess with it for just a few seconds as I start to realize that I may actually have to remove it before I start to put it back in, as the cable's not looking exactly right like it should.
Small enough to store anywhere. If it ever leaks, even a drop, you get your money back.
Call or click now to get an incredible deal during this exclusive.
Shit, this should go underneath that.
I'm going to go ahead and remove these two screws.
That's why it looks so funny to me.
Social Security provides disability relief, but government red tape has made applying for these benefits too difficult and complicated for many Americans to get.
Doesn't want to come out. I have to pry it out with a dental pick here.
Nation's Disability is here to help. Nation's Disability will evaluate your situation, handle your application, and deal directly with Social Security for you to get the.
This is the cable that I'm talking about. What we'll have to do is wrap around the side of the 3.5mm audio jack here. So lifting it up.
Nation's Disability will fight to get your disability benefits to help you live a better life. Pick up the phone and call Nation's Disability.
And then pushing the cable in and down and around the side of the jack itself.
Navigate the complex maze of Social Security regulations.
And it should fit right back onto its correct spot. And take out another couple screws here. I'll have to lift it up, get it to go into the correct spot. Pulling it out, wrapping it around the side of the 3.5mm jack, putting it onto the correct screw spot here, and then pushing it down all as one unit. And that's why I was saying, if you're going to put this bottom piece in, it might be easier to put all of the piece in as one piece rather than using it as two to reassemble the phone. Now that we've got it in its correct spot, kind of, just look down, so I'm going to go ahead and just fiddle with it just a little bit more. Just goes on top.
No Man's Land is all new Sunday at 10 on History.
Normally it's not this difficult, but this phone is just fighting me all the way.
So what do you have a hard time moving? Leather jackets. Let's put those 25% off. Okay.
Even though we have two stores, we run it as one business, and that's my job to make sure we're on the same page.
If the 25% off incentive doesn't work, we can also do like a free t-shirt.
A little promotion thing.
Yeah, we can do promos that way.
Normally, I'm able to come to Nashville at least 2 to 3 times a month, but with the new building going up in Iowa, it's been tougher.
I always love to come down, but this week Dr. Simeon's coming.
He wants to take a look at a Fiat Cutaway car that the boys bought from Dominican.
Go ahead and put our screws back in, the one we took out of the charging ports, the one that goes next to the home contacts up at the corner here.
Incredible. Fred Simeon is prepared to pay $700,000 for the car. This car is not for sale. That's all.
Unfortunately, they weren't able to land it.
Put the charging port one back in, we'll put the one back in
He's been like our family of roast.
right next to where the home contact is, right in here.
We're at Don's place here in Colorado. I mean, he's got tons of great stuff, and we're just getting started. It's insane. Every corner is cluttered, and there's stuff hanging from the ceiling. We love to dig. This is a mega pick, dude.
And then the last one goes in to hold down the 3.5mm audio jack and its associated pain in the butt cable.
Livestock was to brand them, usually with a small tattoo on their ear. This is a sign that a farmer would put up to tell a potential thief, shove off. Our poultry, our pigs, and our calves are branded with the Horton tattoo marker.
I'm just going to go ahead and put the home contact back into where it should be. Just press it down nice and tight. It should still have some adhesive. It should be fine to go right back on there.
Wanted poster. Yeah, I'll do 25. Okay. All right. You got it. So, do you have brothers and sisters?
I got a brother and a sister.
Do you guys all collect as a family?
We haven't really collected much since my father passed.
Okay.
A little over 3.5 years ago, my father passed away. He was out in the
Just going to finish putting in the remaining screws that go in around the charging port here.
He was fortunate to be able to do what he loved with his antiques. Got to the day he died.
Is everybody on the same page? Are you guys at the point where you're like, hey, we got to start thinning some of this stuff out?
Yeah, we don't want the stuff to, just go to waste. We've had people come in wanting to scrap stuff, and that just won't happen. Like, Frank and Mike come out to help save stuff, and maybe we can supplement my mom's income a little bit.
Slim Jim, look at this. Oh, yeah. That's like a freaking ray gun, man. Did you see this thing?
Right down here in the corner.
Frank, he's like, you're cranking it the wrong way. So I start cranking it, and trying to suck up spider webs with it and stuff. But it was cool, man. I was like, Frank, now look at this. Is this the same kind you're talking about? Now, did you
Definitely want to scratch our new housing just to make sure there's no dust behind it. We're going to pull back this cable just a little bit. Make sure that we get it in the correct spot when we start to insert our logic board. The next thing we need to do is put in our volume, mute, power button, flex cable.
Frame a little bit further. Oh, there's this little latch thing here. So
We have this hinge that goes in right
goes in
here.
with a pin.
This is a little bit
Pin wasn't
tricky.
in there.
You
had
do
to
need
destroy
the hinge from the last one. I
the
actually
case
destroyed
right
my
in the
old
corner.
case trying to get this thing out. It shouldn't be that hard, but
Get
this
it
one was
out.
really pressed in there from when the phone was
Watch
bent.
before.
Using a
Something
pair of
similar
maybe
to
some
that.
small needle nose or something of that nature, you can probably pry it upwards.
About
If
right
not,
here.
you can go ahead and destroy it. This is exactly what we're looking for. And this is the little hinge bolt that
It's got like
you
a
need
watch
out
on it.
to make the power button
Just put
hinge
that
work. This housing did not come with one. It was
corner
right in
here.
this little tiny slot here at the top of the phone. The thin side goes in first, and there's a thicker round edge that goes and stays at the top.
Then we'll need
You will need to kind of press this into the
Press it
phone.
in.
It doesn't take a lot of force. Maybe using the backside of a screwdriver or some sort of a metal instrument just to kind of push it into its correct spot on the phone. Make sure that it's nice and flush.
Just take photos of the
Sits
damage
in
with
there.
your phone and upload an Allstate.
Really?
So you get a quicker estimate, quicker payment,
Flip it back to normal.
I just did it.
I'm going to put a little more force in my screwdriver there.
pin. Now, if you have something really small, like a small pair of tweezers, you might be able to pull it out.
Thing
Just right
here,
in the
a
corner.
small
Top of
needle
the phone.
nose, you might be able
Get
to
out.
pull
I
it up
couldn't do it, so I had
and
to
pull it
destroy
out. Unfortunately, with this one, it did not function that way.
One other thing that I missed on this, if you look right here,
Luckily, the
I was doing that I realized.
see there's a camera piece that fell out of this one, which we'll not be using, but there is a little sensor
Piece
piece
here.
that did not come out. So we're gonna go ahead and pop it out of this old phone here, the old phone casing, and put it into its new spot. Try to get it to stay in its correct part of the phone here.
Alright. That's that done as well.
Now I'd say probably the hardest part of the entire phone is
Things
this
may be done here.
power button ribbon cable. This
Here's
thing
my power
is
cable. It's gonna go back
the
in.
bane of my existence. I hate
like
these
so.
things, but we
all
seem to
you
go out on a lot of
first do is,
phones, and to get it out, you have to do a lot.
Put this
So
side in.
we have the ribbon cable for the volume and the mute
I'm
button.
gonna go from there.
The volume should go in first, and the mute button goes on top of it. So it overlays the two pieces. So there's 4 screw holes, but it only takes 3 screws. And then we have the
my
hinge
assembly
for the
keys
power
in
button.
there.
Now to get all these new
Duh.
parts with my new housing here, but they look a little funky. They don't look exactly the same. So I'm gonna look at them and just see if they're worth using or not. We got a new SIM card tray, which I will definitely use. We have a new mute switch. We have a volume up and down. And we have a new power button as well. So here's my old one, and here's the new one. You can see the finish is a little bit different on them. We'll try using the new one first.
It's like some kind of machine. What I loved about Don's dad was he liked anything mechanical. He's like me, look at me, I can't stop doing this. It's awesome. You know, I'm full
Now
on
this is supposed to be an OEM rear housing, but the buttons do not work on this particular phone. So, a little odd. Now my actual customer gave me this housing, as they're fairly expensive. I mean, they're like, depending on where you find them, you might be able to find one for $50, if that's a good deal on it. But it seems like most of them go for 75, even 100 for the OEMs. So maybe this wasn't an OEM version, but all said and done, what we'll do instead of using those, we'll use our old power up and down button. I mean, our old volume up and down. See, they pop in nice and neat.
Then I see this huge press, original paint, wooden rollers, really cool cast iron base. How about $200?
And our mute switch.
I don't know what the hell I'm gonna do with it, but again, I can appreciate it just like his dad did. 250's cool.
Now the mute switch is orange towards the LCD side of the case.
Everything was mechanical.
So you have to pull it up to make the orange disappear.
Even if you didn't know what it was, you wanted to own it. Look at this thing. I love this thing. This thing is cool.
So we'll put the volume and mute switch side in first. It may actually be easier to put the power side in. You can do it either direction.
Generator. Here, I'll make it easy for you. 50.
I'm just going to put it back in the way that I took it out.
Yeah, it's cool. I appreciate it. This thing is stone cold cool. I have no idea what it is. I can't wait to get it appraised.
It may actually be easier to put it in the power side first.
Railroad locomotive?
Yeah.
So the first screw they're going to put in,
Push them off as they're like on the track and go real slow and kind of
if I can get the buttons to stay in here correctly. This is a trickier part here.
in the middle of the tracks and refuses to move. You just kind of slowly go off.
The mute switch is giving me a little bit of difficulty.
Cool, it's primitive. This thing was handmade. It's wood and it's held together with an iron frame. What railroad was it from?
Uinta?
Uinta. How do you know it came from the Uinta?
We got pictures of that cow catcher actually on the locomotive.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The railroad itself is used for hauling.
Put the screw in at the top of the mute switch here.
Mac, Colorado. It was a short train.
Where were they out of?
Mac, Colorado, 6 miles from here.
He starts telling me about the local railroad and how it's just
Put our power,
apparently the Uinta Railroad
our
started
volume up and down back in.
and lasted just under 40 years. Men, machine, and animals built the West. The railroad was a huge part of that.
My dad loved that thing.
This was one of his prizes.
So looking to see exactly how it's supposed to go. Now this really truly should be the mute button housing, or the little frame goes on top of the volume.
Train was pulling into that depot, man. That big grill.
We have to remove our screw here and then put it in the correct way that it should be. And of course, whenever you take this cable out, everything comes flying out. So we'll put volume in first for us.
Something you consider selling?
Consider it
What would you have to have for it?
around 15.
There's so many people out there that collect railroad stuff. This is like railroad primitive.
I wasn't realizing how long this reassembly was going to take me, so unfortunately my camera is going to die. So you might see the screen jump a little bit.
Be a good number. I could see
Just as a FYI, as I
I don't think I can bring myself to do that.
switch and put a power cable on my camera here.
It's a piece that should just live its life out here, you know?
Yeah.
A piece like this, way out here in Colorado, this valley's history, there was absolutely no way we were gonna buy it and take it out of here. Alright.
Volume button is just, or this mute switch is just not liking me today.
Every single auction involved everything in this county for the last 30 years. Or 40 years, isn't it? Bill, I'm sorry, Bill. You know he's here right here, he's watching you, Frank.
Looking at the other side to make sure it is correct. Alright, so put the power cable back on my phone, so we'll go ahead and start where we left off. So our mute switch, orange side goes up. Make sure that the volume cable is underneath the mute switch housing, so we'll be using a screw that'll screw into the mute switch housing and then through the volume housing and then into the screw hole. And this is the way that this will work out for us. Put the top one in first, and then this screw will go through the mute switch, through the volume housing, and then into the side of the phone. Alright, we're going to test our buttons real quick. Make sure that they are functioning correctly. Mute switch functions correctly. You can feel that it actually flips the switch on the inside. We're going to go ahead and put down the cable because it is adhesed. Make sure we put the connector for the vibration switch back up. Make sure that the cable is nice and straight across the bottom of the phone. There'll be a little sensor portion on the cable that'll need to fit right back into the housing. We have our power button door. Now I think it's actually easier to put the door on first and then put the power button back onto it. That'll make it a little bit easier. And we're just trying to clip this door back onto the hinge. You almost have to have it at a 45 or maybe a 60-degree angle to really get it to clip back on here. So we'll put the door on here first. Then we'll slide the cable underneath it. This does not seem like it's wanting to work for me today. Now as you put the power button back on, you'll see that there's two little holes that it needs to line up with to make sure it's nice and centered. It almost has like a little bit of a cutout of where the actual button should sit within the door. Make sure we put our power button in. And the little hinge portion should be downward facing. It almost looks like it has a little handle on the back side of the volume button, and that should face downwards. And the power button is just not sticking to this little hinge anymore. Now I'd be slightly careful about using any adhesive on this. I prefer not to. It seems like it makes the power button a little bit soft. When you're trying to click, you don't get the full depression behind it. But in some cases you will need to use it. And since this one is just so tricky, we're going to use it on this one. Just kind of trim it up here. Alright, now that we have the power button adhesive to the switch, we're going to go ahead and put our cable onto it. Now I'd normally try to put the hinge in first, but since I couldn't get this to readhese, I went ahead and put the cable onto the little hinge first. Making sure that our button's back in with the little handle downward facing. And here's our hinge. Go ahead and just slide it into place. Like I was saying, it's almost like a 60-degree angle to get that to go back in there. Make sure it clips in. There we go, and the hinge functions. The power button should sit flat. We're just going to test the button here real quick. Depress it a couple times and make sure that it's functioning correctly for us. Now there is a screw that goes into this power button. I'm going to go ahead and put it in place so it doesn't come out because it was such a pain to get back in there. Just double check the power button, make sure it functions properly, that it depresses. Checking the remaining of the switches here. Anybody that has a phone with a non-working power button knows that that is not a fun situation. Not being able to turn off your phone and having to use that little accessory piece that they come with, the accessibility portion. Our little housing we put in earlier for this little sensor area came out, so we're going to go ahead and stick it back into its correct spot. And put the cable back into that little housing that holds it in place. We have a little shield that goes over this to hold the cable down. It is thin side in towards the phone, and then the thicker side where the square goes out and down a little bit. You'll see that it'll actually fit in correctly as you start to retain it. I hate this little shield, by the way, just in case you're aware of. If you're trying to put this phone back together right now, if you get frustrated, take a quick break. This little thing is terrible to put back into place. Especially if you have a magnetized screwdriver. So try to put the screw on and then insert it in here real fast. And just pulled my housing off again. And again. I love it when the videos that you watch are the disassembly of a phone, and then they go, this follow these steps in reverse. Those never seem to work for me. The reverse steps. They don't go back in the same way that they came out. So I'm going to hold this little housing down with my finger and see if I can't insert the screw this way. And this truly is why this video is so long, is because of spots like this where you kind of get stuck. But I truly want people to see exactly what you're in for when you start taking these phones apart. I'm not here to sell you parts. I'm not here to tell you that you need to buy from my website. Really all I want to do is help people repair their phones and do it at a cost that's a little more economical. It seems like if you're looking to replace your housing or your front LCD, at least where I live, it'll cost you easily $200. Most of the time they'll just give you a full phone replacement, which will vary between $200 and maybe $300. And this way, if you fix your phone doing it with the do-yourself method, I mean, I believe this case cost this person maybe $55, $65. I know they got a pretty good deal on it. So definitely a pretty large savings over what it would cost you to take it somewhere and get it done professionally. Try the screwdrivers here and see if that'll help me put it back into place. It just flipped off again. It's awesome. To be honest, I debated not putting this back in here. Which truly is not a good idea. So, like I was saying, if it gets frustrated, make sure you take a break. Try to hold it back down with my finger again. Holy freaking God, we got one in. That's insane. One thing that I thought about after I did this is maybe putting a little bit of adhesive, a tiny piece of that 3M sticky tape on the underside of that housing. Definitely hold it in place a lot better and probably make it a lot easier to do. The things you think of when you're not frustrated about putting the phone back together. Maybe we'll try that on my next one and let you know how it goes. So the next one is a standoff screw. It's a little bit larger screw, so we're going to need to flip our head to a flathead screwdriver to get this head to go back into place. And these standoff screws are always a pain, as they never really seem to want to go in correctly. And I can't get a good grip on it with my flathead screwdriver. This stupid little connector will probably be about a good 10-15 minutes of this entire video. It moved a little bit, so I'm just going to try to get it to go back into its correct spot. I left it a little bit loose to make sure that we can get it to actually move around a little bit when we try to put this next screw in. We have it lined up nice and perfect here. We'll try the tweezers to insert this screw into the correct spot. All right. Check it, make sure it's nice and straight in there. Which it is not. Tighten down the other side here real fast. We're looking good. We're going to put back in our vibrator assembly, but it'll be easier to put in your antenna cable that we took out that fits back in here before you put the motor back in. We want to make sure that the contacts on this power cable line up under the underside of the vibration motor module. There's a total of 3 screws that go in this, one that goes into the bottom of the housing, one that goes in the upper corner of the housing, and then one goes in the top portion of the housing. This last one is the one that I'm talking about that goes in the top portion. Make sure the hole lines up. And then insert the screw. Double checking the screws here. Make sure it's in there nice and tight. Just double checking the power button, make sure everything's still functioning correctly for us. We have our logic board here, which we're going to go ahead and insert. Make sure you pull back the cable for the power button that connects to it. Our little shield just fell off there. A little connector that goes into the sensor port that's going to fit back in here came off during the disassembly, so make sure that you put everything back in the way it should be. I'm just going to maneuver it into its correct spot right next to the camera. Checking for all the cable or the bolt holes to line back up. Double checking to make sure the SIM card slot is in the correct spot. Make sure the camera looks good. Make sure that the flash and the sensor look good on the opposite side of the phone. Sorry for taking it off camera, but sometimes you just have to look at it very, very close. Make sure we pull the cable out. Don't want to have it stuck underneath the board as we start putting screws back in. Just going to double check and reline everything up again, making sure that all the cables fit in the correct spot. Camera sits nice and flat, and it's centered in the lens on the opposite side. It does always feel like the camera is a little bit tilted, and that's okay. It seems like everyone that I've done looks a little funky. I'm pointing out that I forgot to put our antenna piece back in, so we're going to put this in first. I'm going to undo a screw so we can slide it back underneath the vibration module. It'll just stick back down. This has enough adhesive on the back side of it that it should be fine. Plus, I'll have a screw that holds this back into place. So this little antenna module should go underneath the vibration module screw area. This will hold it together. Going to press all this down, make sure that it fits correctly. Just double check to make sure that goes. It goes right next to the camera. A little foam pad that goes on top of the power button. Probably keeps the camera from shorting itself out or moving around too much. Now that we know that our logic board fits in here nice and well, we're going to go ahead and reattach this antenna cable to the back side of the logic board here. We'll do that first before we start to lay it down. So go ahead and clip this back in. You want to be nice and careful as you put this cable on. These wire connectors can be a little bit difficult to attach, so you want to use firm pressure but nothing that will damage it. We're going to put our logic board back into place now that we got all the connectors lined up for us. The little sensor housing that came off, make sure we put that cable back into its correct spot. Pull the cable back out for the power cable here. Go ahead and just realign that little cable, that little sensor cable, that I think it's the proximity sensor, or whatever that is, that has a little insert set piece, but it can be a little bit tricky on this phone, so make sure it sits nice and flush. There's a little housing piece that goes over that to make sure that it sits in there nice and straight, but make sure that it's in the correct spot before you start screwing things onto it. Go ahead and put our connector down here. And make sure you flatten this ribbon cable out. Alright, making great progress on this phone. I know it's a long video, but definitely a lot easier than trying to figure this out on your own. Put our little shield back here at the top that goes on to the little sensor I was just messing with. Making sure the camera's in the correct spot. Camera doesn't look like it's sitting flush. Just gonna mess with it, make sure it's in the correct spot for the LCD to go back on. Alright. The flat side of this connector goes up towards the top of the camera. We'll go ahead and put our screws back in here. The next screws that we're going to put in are for the top of the logic board, the little cable that has connected to it. We're going to put these screws back into the top here. There are 2 of them. There's our first one, and 1 more to go. I'm going to go ahead and just put this bottom ribbon connector back on in its correct spot. There's a little wire antenna here, wire cable here that needs to be clipped back on the black one from the bottom unit. We'll clip that onto the logic board here real fast as well. Just trying to make sure that we have that cable nice and flat against the logic board as we put our battery in. We don't want to have any pulling or tugging on it. Now there are 2 Phillips screws. We'll put the first one up here by the SIM tray slot. And the next one that goes towards the bottom of the SIM tray slot. And then there are 3 barrel, the flat head screws that go back in. I hate these screws with a passion, but they have to go back in to reconnect all of the ribbon cable housing connectors that go back into this phone. First screw goes down here at the bottom of the logic board. Now unfortunately I'm going to actually have to cut the video and it'll actually jump. I'm losing the amount of memory I have on my camera here, so I'll have to crop the film. So you'll see it kind of jump in and out. I didn't realize I was hitting my max storage limit. Alright, we're back to finish the video here. Got our bottom screw in. We're going to go ahead and put the upper screw in first. We have 2 that go up at the top here. Go ahead and try to use some tweezers to put this screw in. For some reason it's not magnetized and it is not working on my magnetized screwdriver at all. Let's go ahead and drop it in the correct spot and then use our flathead screwdriver to put it into its place. Alright, we have 1 more to put in. Goes right down here, kind of in the middle. Alright, we are getting close to finishing this phone off. You can see that it's starting to look like the actual iPhone did. I'm just going to re-push down this home button connector here. It seemed like it wanted to start coming up. If you do need to, use a little bit of glue or a little bit of adhesive to hold this down. This is what tells the home button that you're pressing it onto the logic board. So it is a pretty important little connector set. Alright, I have these cables, these lengthwise little wire cables that need to go back into place. So one's in a straight line and one's in a U, so you can't mix them up. But they do sit one on top of the other. Go ahead and put our U-shaped one in next. Now here we have our battery. Just going to double check and make sure that it's fitting in with the ribbon cable and everything, which it is. Now there's no adhesive on the bottom of this frame, so what we will need to do to make sure this doesn't keep hitting the back of our LCD as we bounce around our pocket, we don't definitely want to break anything, as we'll have to adhere this to the actual housing of the frame of the phone. So we're going to use some thicker 3M double-sided tape here. I shouldn't say thicker, I should say wider tape. I'm just going to cut it to fit the inside portion of the phone. So once we put our battery back in, it'll sit in there. Now we're going to try to make it the exact same shape that it was on this other phone. So when it comes to disassembling this phone, or if I have to work on it in the future, I can keep in mind that the correct pry spots where I pry the battery out still line up correctly. Little gap here in between the side. Alright, everything is looking good. Just going to double check that connector up there. We'll start peeling back the backing of the tape. Go ahead and insert the battery back in. Go ahead and put the battery back on. Now you can wait until you attach your screen. I'm not too concerned about it. Our battery connector, we put our battery in a little too high, so we're just going to try to pull it out here and move it down just a little bit. Just going to try to push it down so we can get it reconnected into the right spot here. This 3M tape almost works as good as their own battery tape does from Apple on these things. Definitely a little bit tricky. Just double check the tape if you're going to have to remove it. We're going to see that it's a little bit lower into the housing here. We'll connect it first. and set it into place. Making sure there's no high spots in the battery. We don't want it to hit the back side of the LCD and cause those pressure light spots or distortion on the screen. Go ahead and put the housing back in place for the battery. This thicker one goes in first and that thinner one goes on top of it. Put our thinner housing on, this little skinnier one. Alright, the phone is looking good. Put our SIM slot in, possibly. Make sure it fits. We're going to use the original one. Everything looks like it's in its right spot. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and put the LCD on. We're going to put the back connector on first to make sure it sits nice and flush. You'll hear these kind of snap on a little bit. Now once you connect all three of these, there should be a little shield that goes over it with 3 screws that hold it in, 3 Phillips screws. Like I was saying, this phone's been opened before and didn't actually have that housing. I know this screen has a bit of a short in it as well. From whatever was damaged, but once we put it back together, I know that the screen works just fine. So you may see a line distorting through it, which isn't a concern to me. Once we put it back together, that fixes itself. So that we do have power back into the phone, which is great. Another thing with this phone is it's very slow to respond to touch once it loads. I've seen a couple of phones that have that issue. We can see that touch is responding for us. I'm just going to double check the connectors here and make sure they're nice and flush. It's working out for us. Home button won't function until you reset this down. All you need to do is take the LCD of the phone, pull it down and insert it into the top portion first, kind of like a sliding door. And then clip it back down into place. We've snapped it back into place. Put our 2 pentalobe screws down in the bottom that we took out. And that is it. We are finished. We have went ahead and swapped the housing on this iPhone 5. So if you liked the video, go ahead and hit the like button. I hope that you'll watch some future YouTube videos that I have coming out. If you need any phones fixed, you can request them and I'll see if I can't do those for you. Thanks again for watching my videos. I'll see you guys next time.